The opulent gates of the Blackwood Manor loomed before Emily Parker as she clutched her worn suitcase, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The sprawling estate, nestled in the heart of Beverly Hills, was a world away from the humble beginnings she'd left behind in small-town Ohio. At just 25, Emily had already weathered more storms than most face in a lifetime, but she was determined to make a fresh start as a nanny for the wealthy Blackwood family. As she approached the imposing front door, Emily smoothed down her simple dress, a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding her. The door swung open, revealing Vivian Blackwood, the lady of the house, whose piercing gaze seemed to strip away Emily's dignity in an instant. "You must be the new nanny," Vivian said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I hope you're not expecting the Ritz. The servants' quarters are around back." Emily swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood. I'm grateful for the opportunity." Vivian's perfectly manicured hand waved dismissively. "Save the gratitude. Just don't mess up, or you'll be back on the street faster than you can say minimum wage." As Emily was led to her modest room by the housekeeper, Mrs. Thompson, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her past pressing down on her. The secret she carried was a burden that threatened to crush her spirit, but she was determined to persevere. Little did she know that her arrival at Blackwood Manor would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of this gilded world. The following morning, Emily was introduced to her charges, 10-year-old twins, Sophia and Samuel. While Sophia regarded Emily with curiosity, Samuel's eyes held nothing but contempt. "Another poor loser trying to climb the social ladder," Samuel sneered, his words a chilling echo of his mother's attitude. Emily's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. "I'm here to take care of you and help you with your studies. I hope we can be friends." Sophia's eyes lit up, but Samuel scoffed. "Friends? With the help? Don't make me laugh." As the days passed, Emily threw herself into her work, determined to prove her worth. She spent hours helping the children with their homework, organizing their schedules, and even managing to coax a few smiles from the initially reluctant Sophia. But for every small victory, there seemed to be a crushing defeat. One evening, as Emily was preparing the children for a lavish charity gala their parents were hosting, disaster struck. She was carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres to the kitchen when she collided with Vivian, who was rushing through the hall in a dazzling designer gown. Time seemed to slow as the tray clattered to the floor, splattering Vivian's dress with an array of colorful appetizers. The silence that followed was deafening. "You clumsy, worthless girl!" Vivian shrieked, her face contorted with rage. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? More than you'll make in a lifetime." Emily's apologies fell on deaf ears as Vivian continued her tirade, drawing the attention of the entire household staff and even some early arriving guests. Among them was Alexander Blackwood, Vivian's husband and the family patriarch, whose stormy expression sent chills down Emily's spine. "I want her gone, Alexander," Vivian demanded, pointing a trembling finger at Emily. "Fire her this instant." Emily's world spun as she faced the very real possibility of losing everything she'd worked so hard for. But just as Alexander opened his mouth to speak, a small voice cut through the chaos. "It wasn't her fault, Mom," Sophia said, her voice quavering but determined. I left my backpack in the hall." Emily tripped over it. All eyes turned to the young girl, who stood defiantly beside Emily. For a moment, confusion flickered across Vivian's face, replaced quickly by suspicion. "Is this true?" Alexander asked, his deep voice resonating through the room. Before Emily could respond, Samuel stepped forward, his face a mask of indifference. "Yes, Father. I saw it happen." The tension in the room was palpable as Alexander considered the situation. Finally, he turned to Emily, his expression unreadable. Clean this up and get back to work. We'll discuss this incident later." As the crowd dispersed and Emily hurried to clean the mess, her mind raced. Why had the children lied to protect her? And what did Alexander mean by discussing it later? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just transpired. Later that night, as the gala was in full swing, Emily found herself in the library, dusting the shelves and trying to make herself as invisible as possible. The sound of the door opening startled her, and she turned to find Alexander Blackwood standing in the doorway, his expression inscrutable. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry about earlier." "I promise it won't happen again," Emily began, her voice trembling. Alexander held up a hand to silence her. "I'm not here about the incident with my wife, Miss Parker. I'm here because I've noticed something peculiar about you." Emily's heart raced as she wondered what he could possibly mean. Had he discovered her secret? Was this the end of her time at Blackwood Manor? "You're different from the other staff we've had," Alexander continued, his eyes boring into hers. "The way you interact with the children, the dedication you show. It's refreshing, to say the least." Relief washed over Emily, but it was short-lived as Alexander's next words sent a chill down her spine. "But I can't help feeling that you're hiding something. And in this house, Miss Parker, secrets have a way of coming to light, often with devastating consequences." As Alexander turned to leave, Emily felt the weight of her past pressing down on her more heavily than ever. She knew that she was walking a dangerous line, but she couldn't afford to lose this job. Not when she was so close to achieving her goals and finally putting her troubled past behind her. Little did Emily know that her secret was about to collide with the dark underbelly of the Blackwood family's own hidden truths. As she stood there, trembling in the dimly lit library, the pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed were beginning to fall into place. Across town, in a dimly lit office, a private investigator named Jack Reeves was poring over a file labeled Emily Parker. His weathered face creased with concern as he picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd hoped never to use again. "It's Reeves," he said gruffly when the line connected. "We've got a situation. The girl we've been looking for. I think I've found her. And you're not going to believe where she's ended up." As Jack hung up the phone, he couldn't shake the feeling that he just set in motion a chain of events that would change many lives forever. For better or for worse, the truth about Emily Parker was about to come to light, and the repercussions would shake the Blackwood family to its very core. Back at Blackwood Manor, as the sounds of the gala drifted through the house, Emily stood at the window of her small room, gazing out at the twinkling lights of Beverly Hills. She allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, a single tear tracing its way down her cheek as she whispered to herself, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. But I have to do this, for both of us." Little did she know that her past and her future were about to collide in ways she could never have imagined, and that the gilded walls of Blackwood Manor were about to witness a drama that would rival the most sensational of telenovelas. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the truth, the earth-shattering, life-altering truth, was waiting in the wings, ready to make its grand entrance. The following weeks at Blackwood Manor were a delicate dance for Emily, each step fraught with the potential for disaster. She threw herself into her duties with renewed vigor, determined to prove her worth and silence the whispers that seemed to follow her through the grand halls. But even as she made small inroads with the children, particularly the sweet-natured Sophia, the shadow of Vivian, Blackwood's disdain loomed large over her every move. One crisp autumn morning, as Emily was helping Sophia with her science project in the manor's sprawling garden, she felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. Turning, she found Samuel watching them from the terrace, his young face twisted into a sneer that was disturbingly reminiscent of his mother's. "Why do you even bother?" he called out, his voice dripping with derision. "You'll never be one of us, you know. You're just the help, disposable and forgettable." Emily's heart clenched at the cruelty in the boy's words, but before she could respond, Sophia jumped to her feet, her small fists clenched at her sides. "That's not true, Samuel," she cried, her voice trembling with emotion. "Emily is kind and smart, and she actually cares about us. That's more than I can say for Sophia," Emily interjected gently, placing a calming hand on the girl's shoulder. "It's okay. Your brother is entitled to his opinion." Samuel's face flickered with something, surprise, perhaps, or a hint of grudging respect, before settling back into its usual mask of indifference. He shrugged and sauntered back into the house, leaving Emily to wonder, not for the first time, what pain lay beneath the surface of this fractured family. As the days wore on, Emily found herself growing closer to Sophia, whose hunger for affection was as palpable as her brother's disdain. Late one night, as Emily was tucking the girl into bed, Sophia's small hand caught her wrist. "Emily," she whispered, her eyes wide in the dim light of her princess-themed bedroom, "can I tell you a secret?" Emily's heart skipped a beat, her own secrets pressing against her lips. But she pushed them down, focusing instead on the vulnerable child before her. "Of course, sweetheart. You can tell me anything." Sophia glanced nervously at the door before continuing, her voice barely audible. I heard Mommy and Daddy fighting last night. Mommy was saying something about Daddy having a love child? What does that mean, Emily?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Emily processed the girl's words. A love child? Could it be possible that the great Alexander Blackwood, pillar of the community and paragon of family values, had a secret of his own? "Oh, Sophia," Emily murmured, smoothing the girl's hair. "Sometimes grown-ups say things when they're angry that they don't really mean. Try not to worry about it, okay?" But even as she soothed the child, Emily's mind was racing. Could this be the leverage she needed to secure her position in the household? Or was it a dangerous piece of knowledge that could lead to her undoing? Little did Emily know that at that very moment, in his study on the other side of the manor, Alexander Blackwood was engaged in a heated phone conversation that would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. "I don't care what it takes," he hissed into the receiver, his normally composed facade cracking under the weight of desperation. "Find her. Find my daughter before it's too late." As Alexander hung up the phone, he turned to find Vivian standing in the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury. "Still searching for your little bastard, are you?" she spat, venom dripping from every word. "When will you accept that she's gone, Alexander? She doesn't want to be found, especially not by you." Alexander's shoulders sagged, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him. "You don't understand, Vivian. If what I've heard is true, she's in danger. I have to make this right." Vivian's laugh was brittle, devoid of any real mirth. "Make it right? You should have thought of that 18 years ago, before you decided to play happy families with your mistress." As the couple's argument escalated, neither noticed the small figure lurking in the shadows of the hallway. Samuel, his young face set in lines of confusion and anger, absorbed every word, filing them away for future use. In that moment, a seed of resentment took root in the boy's heart, a seed that would grow into a poisonous plant, threatening to strangle the very foundations of the Blackwood legacy. Across town, in a dingy apartment that was a far cry from the opulence of Blackwood Manor, private investigator Jack Reeves was burning the midnight oil. His desk was covered in papers, photographs, and newspaper clippings, all centered around two key figures, Emily Parker and a young woman whose face bore a striking resemblance to Alexander Blackwood. "It can't be a coincidence," Jack muttered to himself, connecting red strings between various points on a corkboard. But how the hell did she end up as a nanny in her own father's house? A sharp knock at the door startled Jack from his reverie. His hand instinctively went to the gun at his hip as he approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "Open up, Reeves." We need to talk." Jack's blood ran cold as he recognized the voice. Slowly, he unbolted the door to reveal a man in an expensive suit, his silver hair immaculately styled despite the late hour. "Mr. Blackwood," Jack said, his voice carefully neutral. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Alexander Blackwood strode into the apartment, his eyes quickly taking in the evidence of Jack's investigation. "I think you know why I'm here, Reeves. You've found her, haven't you?" Jack hesitated, years of investigative instincts warring with the weight of the check in his pocket, a check signed by Alexander Blackwood himself. "I may have a lead," he admitted finally. "But I'm not sure you're going to like what I've found." As Jack laid out his discoveries, Alexander's face went through a gamut of emotions: shock, disbelief, and finally, a desperate hope. "Are you certain?" he demanded, gripping the edge of Jack's desk. "Are you absolutely certain it's her?" Jack nodded slowly. "DNA doesn't lie, Mr. Blackwood. The girl you hired as a nanny. Emily Parker, she's your daughter." The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Alexander sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "All this time," he murmured. "She's been right under my nose, and I didn't even see it." "The question is," Jack said, leaning forward, "what are you going to do about it?" Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. His face paled as he read the message. "It's Vivian," he said, his voice tight with tension. "She knows." Back at Blackwood Manor, Emily was blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over her head. She was in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Thompson prepare a late-night snack for the children, when the sound of shattering glass made her jump. "You conniving little bitch!" Vivian's voice rang out, shrill with fury. Emily turned to find the lady of the house standing in the doorway, a broken wine glass at her feet and a crumpled piece of paper clutched in her trembling hand. "Did you think you could fool us? Did you think you could worm your way into this family and take what isn't yours?" Emily's mind raced, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "Mrs. Blackwood, I don't understand." "Don't play innocent with me," Vivian snarled, advancing on Emily with murderous intent. "I know exactly who you are, Emily Parker. Or should I say, Emily Blackwood?" The kitchen fell silent, save for the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Emily felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, her deepest fears and most closely guarded secrets laid bare. How did you find out?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Vivian's laugh was cold and brittle. "Did you really think you could keep something like this hidden? In this house, secrets have a way of coming to light." She thrust the paper at Emily. "DNA doesn't lie, my dear. You're Alexander's daughter, the living, breathing proof of his infidelity." Emily's hands shook as she took the paper, her eyes scanning the irrefutable evidence of her true parentage. I didn't know," she stammered. "I swear, I had no idea." But Vivian was beyond reason, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and hatred. "Liar! You came here to destroy my family, to take what's rightfully ours. Well, I won't let you. Do you hear me? I'll see you on the streets before I let you steal my children's inheritance." As Vivian's tirade continued, neither woman noticed the small figure standing in the shadows of the hallway. Sophia, her young face streaked with tears, absorbed every word, her world shifting on its axis as she realized that the nanny she had come to love was, in fact, her half-sister. The commotion drew Samuel from his room, and as he took in the scene before him, a cold calculation settled over his features. In that moment, the boy made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the Blackwood family to its very core. Slipping away unnoticed, Samuel made his way to his father's study. With practiced ease, he accessed Alexander's private computer, his fingers flying over the keys as he searched for the information he needed. A triumphant smile curved his lips as he found what he was looking for: financial records that, in the right hands, could bring the mighty Blackwood empire crashing down. As the chaos unfolded in the kitchen, Alexander Blackwood was racing back to the manor, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. He had dreamed of this moment for 18 years, the chance to finally meet his long-lost daughter, to make amends for the mistakes of his past. But as he pulled up to the gates of Blackwood Manor, he couldn't shake the feeling that he might already be too late. The scene that greeted Alexander as he burst through the front door was one of utter pandemonium. Vivian's shrieks echoed through the halls, interspersed with the sound of breaking china and the terrified cries of the staff. But it was the sight of Emily, his daughter, cowering against the kitchen counter, her face a mask of fear and confusion, that spurred him into action. Enough! Alexander's voice boomed through the kitchen, silencing everyone in an instant. Vivian, step away from her. Now. Vivian whirled to face her husband, her eyes wild with a mixture of hurt and betrayal. You knew, she hissed. You knew she was here, didn't you? Was this all part of your plan? To bring your bastard into our home and make a fool of me? Alexander's face crumpled with guilt and regret. No, Vivian. I swear to you, I had no idea. I've been searching for her for years, but I never imagined. His voice trailed off as his eyes met Emily's for the first time with the full knowledge of their connection. In that moment, it was as if the years fell away, and he saw not the young woman before him, but the baby he had held in his arms so briefly all those years ago. Emily, he breathed, taking a step towards her. I don't know what to say. I've dreamed of this moment for so long, but I never imagined it would happen like this. Emily stood frozen, her mind reeling as she tried to process the revelation that had turned her world upside down. The man she had come to know as her stern, distant employer was, in fact, her father. The family she had envied and resented was, in some twisted way, her own. Why, she finally managed to choke out. Why did you abandon us? Why did you let me grow up thinking I was worthless, that I didn't deserve love? Alexander's face crumpled with shame. I didn't know, he said, his voice heavy with regret. Your mother, she never told me she was pregnant. By the time I found out, years had passed, and I was a coward. I convinced myself that you were better off without me, that I would only complicate your life. But not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you, haven't wondered about the daughter I never knew. As the emotional confrontation unfolded in the kitchen, Samuel was putting the final touches on his plan. With a few keystrokes, he sent the damning financial records to a carefully chosen list of recipients, journalists, competitors, and government officials who would be all too eager to tear down the Blackwood empire. A satisfied smirk played across the boy's face as he closed the laptop. Let them all tear each other apart, he thought. In the end, he would be the one left standing, the true heir to the Blackwood legacy. Little did Samuel know that his actions were about to set off a chain reaction that would not only destroy his family but would have far-reaching consequences that would touch lives far beyond the gilded walls of Blackwood Manor. As the night wore on, the emotional tempest in the kitchen showed no signs of abating. Vivian, her composure utterly shattered, alternated between hurling invectives at her husband and breaking into heaving sobs. Emily stood shell-shocked, her worldview shifting with each passing moment as she tried to reconcile the life she had known with the truth that now lay before her. And through it all, Alexander Blackwood stood at the eye of the storm, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. As he looked from his wife to his newly discovered daughter, he realized that the moment of reckoning he had both longed for and dreaded had finally arrived. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Either of you. But please, give me a chance to explain, to make things right." As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows of Blackwood Manor, none of its occupants could have imagined the seismic shifts that were about to rock their world. For in the coming days, long-buried secrets would be unearthed, alliances would be forged and broken, and the true meaning of family would be tested in ways none of them could have foreseen. The stage was set for a drama of Shakespearean proportions, with love, betrayal, and redemption hanging in the balance. And at the center of it all stood Emily Parker, or was it Emily Blackwood? A young woman who had come seeking a fresh start, only to find herself at the heart of a storm that threatened to sweep away everything and everyone she had ever known. As the sun rose over Beverly Hills, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Blackwood Manor, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The truth had come to light, and its revelations would continue to reverberate through their lives, changing destinies and challenging everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of family. The days following the explosive revelation at Blackwood Manor unfolded like a surreal dream for Emily. The opulent halls that had once felt so alien now echoed with whispers of her true heritage, each glance and murmur a reminder of the seismic shift in her world. She found herself adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions, anger at the years of abandonment, confusion over her place in this newfound family, and a desperate, aching hope that perhaps, at last, she had found somewhere she truly belonged. Alexander Blackwood, for his part, walked the manor like a ghost, his normally commanding presence diminished by the weight of his guilt and the constant, accusatory glares from Vivian. He made several attempts to speak with Emily privately, each one thwarted by circumstance or his own cowardice. The mighty titan of industry found himself paralyzed, unsure how to bridge the chasm of years and hurt that separated him from the daughter he had only just discovered. It was Sophia who finally broke the stalemate. One afternoon, as Emily sat alone in the garden, lost in thought, the young girl approached, her small face a mask of determination. "Is it true?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you really my sister?" Emily's heart clenched at the innocence and hope in the child's eyes. "Half-sister," she corrected gently, then immediately regretted the distinction as Sophia's face fell. "But yes, it's true. I only just found out myself." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then, to Emily's surprise, the girl flung herself into her arms, hugging her tightly. "I always wanted a big sister," she whispered fiercely. "I'm glad it's you." As Emily held the trembling child, tears stinging her eyes, she felt a flicker of warmth in her heart. Perhaps, amidst all the chaos and pain, there was still room for love and new beginnings. But not everyone in the Blackwood household was as welcoming. Samuel, his young face twisted with a bitterness beyond his years, watched the scene from his bedroom window, his mind churning with dark thoughts. The financial records he had leaked were a ticking time bomb, and he couldn't wait to watch it all go up in flames. Little did Samuel know that his actions had set in motion events far beyond his control. Across town, in the offices of the Los Angeles Tribune, investigative journalist Megan Chin was poring over the anonymous tip that had landed in her inbox. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through document after document, each one more damning than the last. "Holy shit," she breathed, reaching for her phone. "Editor's going to want to see this ASAP." As Megan began to unravel the web of financial misdeeds and cover-ups that had allowed the Blackwood empire to flourish, another player was about to enter the game. In a small, nondescript office on the outskirts of the city, private investigator Jack Reeves was having a crisis of conscience. He stared at the check on his desk, payment from Alexander Blackwood for finding his long-lost daughter. But it wasn't the money that troubled him, it was the other information he had uncovered during his investigation, information that could blow the entire Blackwood saga wide open. With a heavy sigh, Jack picked up his phone and dialed a number he had sworn he'd never use again. "Hey, it's Reeves," he said when the line connected. "I think I've got something you're going to want to hear." It's about Emily Parker and her mother. Back at Blackwood Manor, the tenuous peace was about to be shattered once again. Vivian, her composure regained but her eyes still blazing with cold fury, cornered Emily in the library. "I hope you don't think this changes anything," she hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into Emily's arm. "You might have Alexander wrapped around your little finger, but make no mistake, you will never be a true Blackwood. You're nothing but a gold-digging opportunist, just like your mother." Emily wrenched her arm free, anger flaring in her chest. "You don't know anything about my mother," she spat. "She raised me alone, worked herself to the bone to give me a better life. If anyone's an opportunist here, it's you, clinging to your husband's money and status while treating everyone around you like dirt." The sound of Vivian's slap echoed through the library, leaving a stinging red mark on Emily's cheek. But before either woman could say another word, a new voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Vivian." Both women turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway, his face a mask of barely contained anger. "I've tolerated your behavior for far too long, but I draw the line at physical violence. Especially against my daughter." Vivian's laugh was brittle and cold. "Your daughter? Please, Alexander. She's nothing but a reminder of your infidelity, a stain on our family name. If you had any decency left, you'd send her packing before she destroys everything we've built." Alexander's eyes hardened. "The only thing being destroyed here is my patience. Emily stays. And if you can't accept that, well..." He let the implication hang in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. As Vivian stormed out, her face flushed with humiliation and rage, Emily found herself alone with the father she had never known. The silence between them was deafening, years of unspoken words and missed opportunities hanging in the air. "I'm sorry," Alexander finally said, his voice heavy with regret. "For everything. For not being there, for not knowing, for letting you grow up thinking you weren't wanted." Emily's throat tightened with emotion. "Why?" she managed to choke out. "Why didn't you look for us? Why didn't you care?" Alexander's shoulders sagged under the weight of his guilt. "I did look," he admitted. "When I found out about you, years after. I searched everywhere. But your mother had disappeared, changed her name. I hired investigators, spent a fortune trying to find you both. But by then, the trail had gone cold." He took a hesitant step towards her, his hand outstretched. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. But please, Emily, give me a chance to make things right. To be the father I should have been all along." As Emily stood there, torn between a lifetime of hurt and the desperate longing for a family she had never known, neither she nor Alexander was aware of the storm that was brewing just beyond the walls of Blackwood Manor. For at that very moment, Megan Chin was putting the finishing touches on an exposé that would shake the foundations of the Blackwood Empire, while Jack Reeves was uncovering a secret that would rewrite everything Emily thought she knew about her past. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but the atmosphere inside Blackwood Manor was anything but sunny. Emily, unable to sleep, had risen early and was nursing a cup of coffee in the kitchen when Mrs. Thompson bustled in, her usually cheerful face creased with worry. "Oh, Miss Emily," she said, wringing her hands. "Have you seen the news?" Before Emily could respond, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the direction of Alexander's study, followed by a string of muffled curses. Heart-pounding, Emily rushed to investigate, Mrs. Thompson close on her heels. The scene that greeted them was one of utter chaos. Alexander stood amidst a sea of broken glass and scattered papers, his face ashen as he stared at the television mounted on the wall. Emily's eyes widened as she took in the headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen, "Blackwood Empire built on fraud? Exclusive exposé reveals years of financial misdeeds." "It's all there," Alexander muttered, his voice hollow. Every dirty deal, every cut corner, every bribe. How? How did they get this information? As if in answer to his question, Samuel appeared in the doorway, his young face a mask of cold satisfaction. "Surprise, Daddy dearest," he drawled, holding up a flash drive. "Turns out your precious empire isn't as secure as you thought." The realization dawned on Alexander's face, quickly replaced by a mixture of shock and betrayal. "Samuel? You did this? But why?" The boy's laugh was chilling in its bitterness. "Why? Because you're all liars and hypocrites. You preach about family and legacy, but it's all just a facade. Well, I decided it was time for the truth to come out. All of it." As Alexander lunged for his son, Emily stepped between them, her mind reeling. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking. "What do you mean, all of it? What else is there?" Samuel's smile was cruel as he turned to Emily. "Oh, big sister, you have no idea. Did you really think your little Cinderella story was the only secret in this family? Ask dear old dad about your mother. Ask him what really happened 18 years ago." The color drained from Alexander's face as all eyes turned to him. "Samuel, don't," he pleaded, but it was too late. "Your mother didn't just disappear," Samuel continued, his words dripping with venom. "She was paid off. A cool $1 million to vanish and never breathe a word about you or your paternity. Isn't that right, Dad?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Emily processed this new betrayal. She turned to Alexander, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and fury. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Did you buy my mother's silence? Was that why she always struggled, why we never had enough? Because she was too proud to spend your hush money?" Alexander's silence was all the confirmation she needed. With a choked sob, Emily turned and fled the room, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She ran blindly through the manor, past a startled Vivian and a concerned Sophia, out into the gardens where she had once found solace. As she collapsed onto a stone bench, her body racked with sobs, Emily felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Jack Reeves, the private investigator, his weathered face creased with sympathy. "I think it's time you heard the whole story," he said softly. "About your mother, about the past, and about the danger you're in now." Emily wiped her eyes, confusion mingling with her grief. "Danger? What are you talking about?" Jack's expression was grim as he handed her a thick file. "Your mother didn't just disappear, Emily. She went into hiding. And if what I've uncovered is true, she had damn good reason to be afraid." As Emily opened the file with trembling hands, she had no way of knowing that she was about to uncover a truth far more shocking and dangerous than anything she had imagined. A truth that would not only redefine her understanding of her past but would put her very life in jeopardy. Meanwhile, back in the study, the Blackwood family was imploding. Vivian, having overheard Samuel's revelation, was in a state of near hysteria, alternating between screaming at Alexander and sobbing uncontrollably. Sophia clung to Mrs. Thompson, her young face a mask of confusion and fear. And Samuel? He stood in the midst of the chaos he had created, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. In his mind, this was just the beginning. He had no idea of the forces he had set in motion, or the danger he had placed not just his family, but himself in. For across town, in a nondescript warehouse, a group of men were gathered around a table, their faces grim as they discussed the Blackwood exposé. "This complicates things," one of them growled. "If the feds start digging, it's only a matter of time before they uncover our connection." The man at the head of the table, his silver hair and expensive suit at odds with the dingy surroundings, leaned forward. "Then we make sure they don't dig," he said, his voice cold and determined. "We've worked too hard and come too far to let some muckraking journalist and a long-lost heir bring us down." It's time to tie up loose ends. Permanently. As the men nodded in agreement, the leader picked up a photograph from the table, a candid shot of Emily in the Blackwood Gardens. "Find her," he ordered. "And make sure she never gets a chance to tell her story." Back at Blackwood Manor, oblivious to the deadly wheels now in motion, Emily was engrossed in the file Jack had given her. With each page she turned, each document she read, she felt her world shifting once again. The mother she had known, kind, struggling, always a bit sad, was revealed in a new light. A woman on the run, not from shame or a broken heart, but from something far more sinister. "I don't understand," Emily said, looking up at Jack with tears in her eyes. "Why didn't she ever tell me? Why did she let me believe?" Jack's face was grave as he took a seat beside her. "Your mother was trying to protect you, Emily. The less you knew, the safer you were. But now the truth is coming out, whether we're ready for it or not." As Emily opened her mouth to ask another question, a commotion from the house caught their attention. Alexander burst out onto the terrace, his face pale with fear. "Emily! Thank God you're still here. We need to leave, now. It's not safe." His words were cut off by the sound of screeching tires and slamming car doors. Men in dark suits were pouring onto the grounds, their expressions grim and purposeful. Jack was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to the gun concealed beneath his jacket. "Looks like our time's up," he muttered. "Emily, listen to me carefully. Everything you need to know is in that file. Find your mother. She's the key to all of this." As the men drew closer, Jack turned to Alexander. "Get her out of here," he ordered. "Use the back way. I'll hold them off as long as I can." Alexander nodded, grabbing Emily's hand and pulling her towards a hidden path at the edge of the garden. As they ran, the sound of shouting and gunfire erupted behind them. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her mind struggling to process the sudden turn of events. Just hours ago, her biggest worry had been navigating the complex dynamics of her newfound family. Now she was running for her life, clutching a file full of secrets and with more questions than answers. As they reached Alexander's car, hidden in a secluded part of the estate, Emily turned for one last look at Blackwood Manor. The place that had been the source of so much pain and confusion, but also the key to unlocking her past. Smoke was now rising from one wing of the house, and she could hear Vivian's hysterical screams even from this distance. "We can't just leave them," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Sophia, Mrs. Thompson, even Vivian and Samuel. They're in danger too." Alexander's face was a mask of anguish as he gunned the engine. "We don't have a choice," he said grimly. "The best thing we can do for them now is get as far away as possible and figure out how to fix this mess." As the car sped away from Blackwood Manor, Emily clutched the file to her chest, her mind racing. Somewhere out there was her mother, the woman who held the key to unraveling this entire mystery. And Emily was determined to find her, no matter the cost. What she didn't know was that she wasn't the only one on the hunt. For even as they fled, other forces were mobilizing. The men who had stormed the manor were regrouping, their leader barking orders into a phone. "They got away," he snarled. "Put out an APB. I want every exit from the city watched. They can't have gone far." And in a small apartment across town, Megan Chin was staring at her computer screen in disbelief. The story she had published was only the tip of the iceberg. As she dug deeper into the files that had been leaked to her, she uncovered a web of corruption and criminal activity that went far beyond the Blackwood family. "Oh my God," she whispered, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she started to piece together the bigger picture. "This isn't just about one family's secrets. This goes all the way to the top." As night fell over Los Angeles, the city hummed with unseen tension. In hotel rooms and safe houses, in police stations and newsrooms, the players in this unfolding drama prepared for their next moves. And somewhere on the darkened highways leading out of the city, a car sped through the night, carrying Emily and Alexander Blackwood towards an uncertain future. As the lights of Los Angeles faded in the rearview mirror, Emily's mind raced with the events of the past few hours. The file Jack had given her lay open on her lap, its contents a jumble of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes that painted a picture more complex and terrifying than she could have imagined. "I don't understand," she said, breaking the tense silence that had fallen between her and Alexander. "Why would anyone go to such lengths to keep this hidden? What could possibly be worth all this?" Alexander's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his face etched with lines of worry and guilt. "Power," he said simply. "The kind of power that can make or break nations. Emily, what I'm about to tell you, it goes beyond anything you've read in that file. It's the reason your mother disappeared, the reason I've spent the last 18 years looking over my shoulder." As Alexander began to speak, unraveling a tale of corporate espionage, political manipulation, and a shadowy organization known only as the Syndicate, Emily felt as though she were listening to the plot of a far-fetched thriller. But the gravity in her father's voice, the fear in his eyes, told her that every word was true. "Your mother," Alexander continued, his voice thick with emotion, "she stumbled onto something she was never meant to see. Evidence that could bring down not just the Syndicate, but half the power brokers in Washington. That's why she ran, why she hid you away. It wasn't the money I offered her, it was the chance to disappear, to keep you safe." Emily's head spun as she tried to reconcile this new information with the life she had known. "But why now?" she asked. "Why is all of this coming to light after all these years?" Alexander's laugh was bitter. "Because of me," he admitted. I thought I could play their game, use my position to gather evidence, to finally bring them down. But I underestimated how far they'd go to protect their secrets. And now, because of my arrogance, I've put everyone I love in danger." As they sped through the night, Emily's thoughts turned to those they'd left behind: Sophia, innocent and frightened; Samuel, angry and misguided; Vivian, her world crumbling around her. And somewhere out there was her mother, the woman who held the final pieces of this puzzle. "We need to find her," Emily said, determination replacing the fear in her voice. "My mother. She's the key to all of this, isn't she?" Alexander nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "If she's still alive, if she still has the evidence, it could be our only chance to make this right." As the first light of dawn began to streak the sky, Emily made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. She would protect her newfound family, all of them, even those who had treated her with disdain. And she would bring to justice those who had torn her world apart. Little did she know that back in Los Angeles, the wheels of fate were already in motion. In a dimly lit office, the leader of the Syndicate was issuing orders that would set a nationwide manhunt in motion. In a small apartment, Megan Chin was preparing to publish a story that would shake the foundations of American politics. And in a hospital room on the outskirts of the city, a woman was waking. From a coma, her first words a whispered warning: "Find Emily. She's in danger." As Emily and Alexander Blackwood drove towards an uncertain future, they carried with them the hopes and fears of all those caught in the web of secrets and lies. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine not just their fate, but the fate of a nation. The road ahead was long and fraught with danger, but for the first time in her life, Emily felt a sense of purpose, of belonging. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them not as the unwanted nanny, but as Emily Blackwood, daughter, sister, and perhaps, ultimately, savior. As the sun rose on a new day, casting long shadows across the American landscape, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The truth was coming to light, and its revelations would continue to reverberate through their lives, changing destinies and challenging everything they thought they knew about family, loyalty, and the price of power. The nanny's secret was out, but the greatest revelations were yet to come. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Emily and Alexander pulled into a nondescript motel on the outskirts of a small town in Nevada. Their eyes were bloodshot from the night of driving, their nerves frayed from the constant fear of pursuit. As Alexander checked them in under false names, Emily's mind whirled with the revelations of the past 24 hours. "We should be safe here for a few hours," Alexander said as they entered the shabby room. "Get some rest. We'll need to be sharp for what's ahead." But sleep eluded Emily. As she lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, her thoughts kept returning to the file Jack had given her. With trembling hands, she opened it once more, determined to unlock its secrets. As she pored over the documents, a pattern began to emerge. Coded messages, financial transactions, and grainy photographs painted a picture of a vast conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and industry. And at the center of it all was a name that made Emily's blood run cold: Robert Holloway. "Dad," she called out, her voice trembling. "Who is Robert Holloway?" Alexander's face paled as he turned to her. "Where did you hear that name? It's all over these documents. He seems to be at the center of everything. Who is he?" Alexander sank onto the bed, suddenly looking every one of his years. "Robert Holloway was my best friend. And your mother's first love." As Alexander began to speak, Emily felt as though she were being pulled into the past. A tale of friendship, betrayal, and a love triangle that would shape the course of their lives unfolded before her. "Robert and I grew up together," Alexander explained, his voice heavy with regret. "We were inseparable, two poor kids with big dreams. When we met your mother in college, we both fell for her. But she chose Robert." Emily listened, spellbound, as Alexander recounted how he and Robert had started Blackwood Enterprises together, how their ambition had led them into increasingly murky ethical waters. And how, eventually, they had caught the attention of the syndicate. "We thought we were so clever," Alexander said bitterly. "Using their connections to build our empire. But we were just pawns in their game. By the time we realized how deep we were in, it was too late." "What happened?" Emily pressed, sensing they were approaching the heart of the mystery. Alexander's eyes clouded with pain. "Your mother, she overheard something she shouldn't have. A conversation between Robert and one of the syndicate's top men. She came to me, terrified, not knowing who to trust. And God help me, I saw an opportunity." Emily's heart pounded as the pieces began to fall into place. "You betrayed them. Both of them." Alexander nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I told Robert that your mother was planning to go to the authorities. And I told your mother that Robert was planning to silence her permanently. I gave her money, helped her disappear. And Robert. What happened to him?" Emily whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. "Officially? He died in a car accident. Unofficially, the syndicate doesn't tolerate loose ends." The weight of this revelation hung heavy in the air between them. Emily felt as though she were seeing her father, truly seeing him, for the first time. A man capable of great love, but also of terrible betrayal. "All these years," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "you let me believe, let everyone believe." "I'm so sorry, Emily," Alexander began, but she cut him off. "Sorry doesn't begin to cover it," she snapped, anger rising to replace her shock. "You destroyed lives. You tore families apart. And for what? Power? Money? Before Alexander could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them both freeze. "Room service," a muffled voice called. Alexander's eyes widened in alarm. "We didn't order any." The door burst open, revealing two men in dark suits, guns drawn. "Mr. Blackwood," one of them said, his voice cold. "The syndicate sends its regards." What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Alexander lunged forward, tackling one of the men. "Run, Emily," he shouted as they grappled. Emily's training kicked in, years of self-defense classes her mother had insisted on suddenly making sense. She dodged the second man's grasp, her elbow connecting with his solar plexus. As he doubled over, she snatched up the file and bolted for the door. The sound of gunshots echoed behind her as she ran, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't stop until she reached the parking lot, where she frantically scanned for an escape route. A beat-up pickup truck caught her eye, its engine idling as the driver loaded boxes into the back. Without a second thought, Emily raced towards it, vaulting into the passenger seat. "Drive," she yelled at the startled man behind the wheel. "Please, they're going to kill me." The driver, a rugged-looking man in his 40s, took one look at her terrified face and the men emerging from the motel room and slammed the truck into gear. They peeled out of the parking lot in a spray of gravel, leaving the syndicate's men cursing in their wake. As they sped down the highway, Emily's mind raced. Her father, was he alive? Dead? And what about the rest of the family back in Los Angeles? Were they safe, or had the syndicate already gotten to them? "Thank you," she said to the driver, her voice shaky. "I'm Emily." The man glanced at her, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Jake," he replied. "You want to tell me what kind of trouble you're in, Emily?" She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But there was something about Jake's steady presence that made her want to trust him. "It's complicated," she began. "I've uncovered something big. And now some very dangerous people want to silence me." Jake nodded, as if running from shadowy organizations was an everyday occurrence for him. "Well, you're in luck," he said. "I happen to know a thing or two about staying off the grid." "Where are you headed?" Emily clutched the file to her chest, her mind whirling with possibilities. "I need to find my mother," she said finally. "She's the key to all of this. Her name is Sarah Parker, but she might be using an alias. Last I knew, she was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest." Jake's eyebrows shot up. "Sarah Parker? As in the environmental activist?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. "You know her?" A slow smile spread across Jake's face. "Know her? Lady, your mother is practically a legend in certain circles. She's been leading the charge against corporate corruption and environmental destruction for years. Always suspected there was more to her story than she let on." As Jake filled her in on her mother's activities over the past decade, Emily felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. Sarah Parker, it seemed, had never stopped fighting against the syndicate and what it represented. But her high profile also meant she was in constant danger. "We need to warn her," Emily said urgently. "If the syndicate knows I'm alive, they might go after her next." Jake nodded grimly. "Last I heard, she was organizing a protest against a new pipeline project up in Washington state. It's not much, but it's a start." As they drove north, Emily's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Fear for her father's fate, worry for Sophia and the others left behind, determination to uncover the truth, and a growing sense of anticipation at the prospect of reuniting with her mother. But even as they put miles between themselves and the syndicate's men, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The file in her lap held secrets that could bring down governments, and there were powerful people who would stop at nothing to keep those secrets buried. Little did she know that back in Los Angeles, events were unfolding that would complicate her mission even further. In the chaos following the attack on Blackwood Manor, Vivian had taken charge with a steel resolve that surprised everyone, including herself. Mrs. Blackwood, a police detective, said, his voice tinged with frustration, "I understand you're upset, but we need to know everything if we're going to find your husband and stepdaughter." Vivian's laugh was bitter. "Stepdaughter? That gold-digging imposter is no relation of mine." And as for Alexander, he made his choice. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an empire to run and children to protect." As she strode away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, Vivian's mind was racing. She had always known there were skeletons in the Blackwood closet, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. And yet, a small part of her relished the challenge. For years, she had played the role of the perfect corporate wife. Now, it was her time to shine. "Samuel," she called, her voice sharp. "I need you to tell me everything you know about your father's business dealings. Every dirty little secret, every backroom deal. It's time to clean house." Samuel emerged from the shadows, his young face a mask of cold calculation. "And what's in it for me, Mother?" Vivian's smile was predatory. "Why, darling, isn't it obvious? We're going to take control of Blackwood Enterprises. And then, we're going to crush the syndicate." As mother and son began to plot, neither noticed the small figure listening from behind a partially closed door. Sophia, her eyes wide with fear and determination, knew she had to do something. Emily and her father were in danger, and somehow, she had to help them. Slipping away unnoticed, Sophia made her way to her room. From beneath her mattress, she pulled out a battered old phone, a secret lifeline Emily had given her just in case. With trembling fingers, she dialed the only number programmed into it. Thousands of miles away, in a bustling Seattle coffee shop, a phone buzzed. The woman who answered it felt her heart stop as she heard the young voice on the other end. "Aunt Sarah? It's Sophia. Emily's in trouble. We all are." Sarah Parker, known to the world as a fearless environmental activist but to a select few as Emily's long-lost mother, closed her eyes as the weight of the past came crashing down around her. The moment she had both longed for and dreaded for 18 years had finally arrived. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "Tell me everything." As Sophia poured out the story, Sarah's mind raced. The careful life she had built, the causes she had fought for, the secrets she had kept, all of it was about to come crashing down. But none of that mattered now. Her daughter needed her. "Listen to me carefully, Sophia," Sarah said, her voice taking on the tone of a general rallying her troops. "I'm going to give you some instructions. Follow them to the letter, and I promise you, we're going to make this right." As Sarah began to outline her plan, she felt a fierce determination take hold. The syndicate had taken everything from her once before. She'd be damned if she'd let them do it again. Meanwhile, on a lonely stretch of highway somewhere in Oregon, Emily and Jake continued their journey north. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Emily felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. "We're coming, Mom," she whispered, clutching the file of secrets to her chest. "And this time, we're going to finish this. Once and for all." Little did she know that the final confrontation would require sacrifices beyond anything she could imagine, and that the true test of her strength and character was yet to come. The nanny's secret was out, but the most shocking revelations were still waiting to be uncovered. As night fell over the Pacific Northwest, the players in this high-stakes drama prepared for a showdown that would change their lives forever. The truth was coming to light, and its blinding glare would leave no one unscathed. The Seattle skyline loomed before Emily and Jake as they approached the city limits, the Space Needle piercing the cloudy sky like a beacon of hope. After days on the road, constantly looking over their shoulders, they were finally closing in on their goal. Somewhere in this bustling metropolis was Sarah Parker, environmental activist, crusader against corporate corruption, and the mother Emily. Had thought lost to her forever. "You ready for this?" Jake asked, glancing at Emily with concern. The past few days had forged a bond between them, born of shared danger and a common cause. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. As they navigated the city streets, Emily's mind wandered to the others they'd left behind. Her father, Alexander, had he survived the attack at the motel? Sophia and Samuel, were they safe from the syndicate's reach? And Vivian. Emily couldn't help but wonder how her erstwhile stepmother was handling the chaos that had engulfed their lives. Little did Emily know that at that very moment, Vivian Blackwood was proving herself to be a force to be reckoned with. Back in Los Angeles, the Blackwood empire was under siege, from the media, from the authorities, and from shadowy forces that sought to capitalize on the family's sudden vulnerability. But Vivian, long underestimated as nothing more than a trophy wife, was revealing a steel core that took everyone by surprise. In the opulent boardroom of Blackwood Enterprises, she faced down a group of hostile board members, her chin held high and her eyes blazing with determination. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of discontent, "I understand your concerns. But let me make one thing perfectly clear, the Blackwood name may be tarnished, but our foundation is strong. And I intend to not only weather this storm but to emerge stronger than ever." As Vivian outlined her plan to salvage the company's reputation and root out the corruption that had taken hold, Samuel watched from the shadows, a mixture of admiration and calculation in his young eyes. He had always seen his mother as weak, a mere accessory to his father's power. Now, he was beginning to realize just how wrong he had been. But even as Vivian fought to keep the Blackwood empire from crumbling, forces beyond her control were converging. In a nondescript office building across town, Megan Chin, the intrepid journalist who had first broken the story of the Blackwood scandal, was putting the finishing touches on a follow-up piece that would shake the foundations of power to their very core. "This goes way beyond the Blackwoods," she murmured to herself as she scrolled through document after damning document. The syndicate, government collusion, decades of cover-ups. This is the story of the century. As Megan's finger hovered over the publish button, she hesitated for just a moment. The weight of what she was about to unleash settled heavily on her shoulders. Lives would be ruined, careers destroyed, the very fabric of society tested. But the truth, she believed, had to come out. With a deep breath, she clicked publish, setting in motion a chain of events that would reverberate across the nation. Back in Seattle, Emily and Jake had finally reached their destination, a nondescript apartment building in the heart of the city's eco-friendly district. As they approached the door, Emily's heart pounded in her chest. After all these years, would her mother even recognize her? Would she welcome her with open arms, or had too much time and pain passed between them? Before Emily could knock, the door swung open, revealing a woman whose face she knew only from faded photographs and distant memories. Sarah Parker had aged, lines of worry and determination etched into her face, but her eyes, Emily's eyes, sparkled with the same fire that had driven her all these years. "Emily," Sarah breathed, her voice choked with emotion. "My baby girl. You found me." The reunion was a whirlwind of tears, laughter, and hurried explanations. As Emily poured out the story of the past few weeks, the revelations about her parentage, the attack at Blackwood Manor, the deadly pursuit by the syndicate, Sarah listened with growing horror and resolve. "I always knew this day might come," Sarah said, her voice heavy with regret. "I hoped. I prayed that by staying away, I could keep you safe. But I see now that was never going to be enough. As Sarah began to fill in the missing pieces of the puzzle, a picture emerged of a conspiracy far more vast and insidious than Emily had imagined. The syndicate, it turned out, was merely the public face of a shadow government that had been pulling the strings of power for decades. "Your father," Sarah explained, her voice tight with old pain, "he wasn't just complicit in their schemes. For a time, he was one of them. That's why I had to run, why I had to hide you away. I couldn't let them use you as leverage against me." Emily's mind reeled as she tried to reconcile this new information with the father she thought she knew. "But he searched for us," she protested weakly. "He said he wanted to make things right." Sarah's smile was sad. Alexander always did have a talent for convincing himself he was doing the right thing, even when he was in too deep to see the truth. As mother and daughter talked long into the night, piecing together the fragments of their shared past, Jake kept watch, his instincts honed by years on the run telling him that their respite wouldn't last long. He was right. Just before dawn, as the first light of day began to creep over the Seattle skyline, the sound of screeching tires and slamming car doors shattered the pre-dawn quiet. "They've found us," Jake said grimly, peering out the window at the black SUVs that had surrounded the building. "We need to move. Now." Sarah sprang into action with an efficiency that spoke of years spent preparing for this very moment. From a hidden safe, she retrieved a hard drive and a stack of documents. "Everything we need to bring them down is right here," she said, her voice steely with resolve. "But we need to get it to the right people." As they prepared to make their escape, Emily's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Her heart leapt as she saw the caller ID, Sophia. "Emily," the young girl's voice was frantic. "You need to come back. Something terrible has happened." Emily's blood ran cold as Sophia explained in hurried whispers. Vivian's attempts to salvage the Blackwood empire had backfired spectacularly. In her zeal to root out corruption, she had unwittingly exposed even deeper ties to the syndicate. Now, Samuel was missing, presumably taken as leverage, and Vivian herself was barely staying one step ahead of both the authorities and the syndicates. "Enforcers. We'll be there as soon as we can," Emily promised, her mind racing. "Just stay safe, Sophia. We're going to fix this." As Emily relayed the news to Sarah and Jake, a plan began to form. They had the evidence needed to bring down the syndicate once and for all, but getting it into the right hands while staying alive long enough to see justice done would be no easy feat. "We need to split up," Sarah said, her tactician's mind already mapping out strategies. "Jake, can you get this hard drive to Megan Chen? She's already started to unravel their web. This will give her everything she needs to finish the job." Jake nodded grimly, understanding the gravity of the task he was being entrusted with. "Consider it done. What about you two?" "We're going back to Los Angeles," Emily said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "It's time to face this head-on. We started this fight as a family, and we'll end it as one." As they made final preparations, gathering what weapons and resources they could, Emily felt a strange calm settle over her. The past few weeks had been a crucible, burning away the insecurities and self-doubt that had plagued her for so long. In their place was a core of iron determination. She was Emily Blackwood, daughter of Sarah Parker and Alexander Blackwood, and she would not let the syndicate destroy everything and everyone she loved. Little did Emily know that even as she steeled herself for the coming battle, events were unfolding in Los Angeles that would change the playing field dramatically. In the depths of a secret syndicate facility, Alexander Blackwood, battered but unbowed, was facing down the very man who had set this whole chain of events in motion 18 years ago. "It's over, Robert," Alexander said, staring into the cold eyes of his former best friend and business partner. "The truth is coming out, whether you like it or not." Robert Holloway, the mastermind behind the syndicate's operation, merely smiled, a chilling expression devoid of warmth or humanity. "Oh, Alexander," he said, his voice dripping with false pity. "You always did underestimate me. This isn't the end. It's merely the beginning of a new world order. And you, old friend, won't be around to see it." As Robert raised his gun, time seemed to slow. Alexander closed his eyes, bracing for the impact that would end his life. But the shot never came. Instead, the sound of a scuffle and a choked cry of pain filled the air. Alexander opened his eyes to see Samuel, his young face a mask of fury and determination, wrestling with Robert for control of the gun. In that moment, Alexander saw not the angry, bitter boy of recent months, but the son he had always hoped Samuel would become. "Run, Dad!" Samuel shouted, straining to keep Robert at bay. "Find Emily and Mom. End this." As Alexander hesitated, torn between escaping and helping his son, the gun went off. The sound echoed through the room, followed by a heavy thud. In that terrible moment of silence, the fate of the Blackwood family, and indeed, of the nation itself, hung in the balance. The final confrontation was approaching, and the stakes could not be higher. As Emily and Sarah raced back to Los Angeles, and Jake set off on his mission to deliver the damning evidence to Megan Chin, the pieces were falling into place for a showdown that would determine the future of not just the Blackwood family, but of the very foundations of power in America. The nanny's secret had sparked a chain reaction that was about to reach its explosive conclusion. And in the crucible of that final confrontation, the true strength of family bonds, both blood and chosen, would be tested as never before. The Los Angeles skyline loomed before Emily and Sarah as their plane began its descent. The city that had once represented Emily's hopes and dreams now felt like a battlefield, with the fate of not just the Blackwood family, but the entire nation hanging in the balance. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked, her hand finding Emily's in a gesture of support and solidarity. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "I have to be," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "We've come too far to back down now." As they navigated through the bustling airport, both women were acutely aware of the eyes that seemed to follow their every move. The Blackwood scandal had become national news, and Emily's face was plastered across every television screen and newspaper stand. "We need to move quickly," Sarah murmured, her years of evading detection evident in her cautious demeanor. "The syndicate will be watching all the usual channels." But even as they made their way towards the exit, fate intervened in the form of a familiar face. "Emily! Sarah!" The voice cut through the crowd, causing both women to freeze in their tracks. Turning, they saw Vivian Blackwood striding towards them, her designer heels clicking against the polished airport floor. But this was not the Vivian that Emily remembered. Gone was the cold, disdainful stepmother. In her place was a woman transformed by adversity, her eyes blazing with a mixture of determination and desperation. "Thank God you're here," Vivian said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's Samuel, they've taken him." The next hour was a whirlwind of explanations and hurried planning. In a secluded corner of an airport cafe, Vivian laid out the dire situation. Her attempts to salvage the Blackwood empire had backfired spectacularly, exposing even deeper ties to the syndicate. Samuel, in a moment of reckless bravery, had tried to gather evidence against them only to be captured. "And Alexander?" Emily asked, her heart clenching at the thought of her father. Vivian's face crumpled. "We don't know. He went after Samuel, and we haven't heard from him since." As the gravity of the situation settled over them, Emily felt a strange calm descend. All the petty resentments and family drama of the past few weeks seemed to fade away in the face of this existential threat. "We need to end this," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Once and for all." Sarah nodded, a fierce pride shining in her eyes as she looked at her daughter. "I think I know how. But it's going to be dangerous." As Sarah outlined her plan, Emily marveled at the strategic mind that had kept her mother one step ahead of the syndicate for all these years. They would need every ounce of that cunning to pull off what they were about to attempt. Across town, in the opulent offices of Blackwood Enterprises, Robert Holloway surveyed the city below, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. He had always known this day might come, the day when all his carefully laid plans would be put to the ultimate test. "Sir," his assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. "They're here." Robert smiled, a cold, predatory expression that had struck fear into the hearts of countless adversaries over the years. "Excellent. Send them in." The door opened to reveal Samuel Blackwood, flanked by two burly guards. The boy's face was bruised, his clothes disheveled, but his eyes burned with a defiant fire. "Ah, young Mr. Blackwood," Robert said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "So good of you to join us. I trust your accommodations have been comfortable?" Samuel spat at Robert's feet, earning himself a rough shake from one of the guards. "You won't get away with this," he snarled. "My family will stop you." Robert's laugh was chilling in its lack of humanity. "Oh, my dear boy. Your family is the least of my concerns. By this time tomorrow, the Blackwood name will be nothing but a cautionary tale, a footnote in the grand story of my ascension." As Robert monologued about his plans for a new world order, secure in his perceived victory, he failed to notice the small device blinking quietly in Samuel's pocket, a tracking beacon that was even now guiding Emily and her allies straight to them. Meanwhile, in a nondescript van parked a few blocks from Blackwood Enterprises, a tense group huddled around a bank of computer monitors. Megan Chen, the intrepid journalist who had first broken the Blackwood scandal, worked feverishly to compile the mountain of evidence Jake had delivered. "This is it," she breathed, her eyes wide as she scrolled through document after damning document. "Everything we need to bring down not just the syndicate, but half the power brokers in Washington." Jake, his face grim with the weight of their mission, nodded. "Then we better make damn sure it gets out. Emily and Sarah are counting on us." As Megan prepared to unleash a truth bomb that would shake the foundations of American power, Emily, Sarah, and Vivian were putting the final touches on their audacious plan. "Remember," Sarah said, her voice taut with tension, "timing is everything. We'll only have one shot at this." Emily nodded, trying to quell the butterflies in her stomach. Everything they had been through, all the pain, the revelations, the betrayals, had led to this moment. She only hoped they were equal to the task. As night fell over Los Angeles, the players in this high-stakes drama moved into position. Emily and Sarah, disguised as maintenance workers, made their way into the Blackwood Enterprises building. Vivian, drawing on every ounce of her social capital, arranged a last-minute board meeting, ensuring that all the key players would be in one place. And in a secret room deep within the building, Alexander Blackwood worked feverishly to decrypt the final piece of evidence that would unravel the syndicate's web of lies. He had managed to escape Robert's clutches, but not before overhearing the full extent of their plans. Now, it was a race against time to stop a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of democracy. As the clock struck midnight, all hell broke loose. Emily and Sarah burst into the boardroom, shedding their disguises and brandishing the evidence they had gathered. At the same moment, Megan Chen's exposé went live, flooding social media and news outlets with irrefutable proof of the syndicate's crimes. Robert Holloway, caught off guard by the sudden turn of events, reached for the gun hidden in his desk drawer. But before he could take aim, a figure burst through the door, Alexander Blackwood, battered but unbowed, with Samuel close behind. "It's over, Robert," Alexander said, his voice ringing with the weight of years of guilt and regret. "The truth is out. There's nowhere left to run." For a moment, the room was frozen in a tableau of shock and disbelief. Then, chaos erupted. Board members scrambled to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. Security guards, unsure of where their loyalties should lie, hesitated with hands on their weapons. In the midst of the mayhem, Emily found herself face to face with Robert Holloway, the man who had orchestrated so much pain and suffering. "You," he snarled, his carefully cultivated mask of civility crumbling to reveal the monster beneath. "You're the spitting image of your mother. I should have made sure you were taken care of years ago." As Robert raised his gun, time seemed to slow. Emily saw her life flash before her eyes, not just the past few weeks of revelations and danger, but all the years of loneliness and self-doubt that had led her to this moment. But before Robert could pull the trigger, a blur of motion knocked him sideways. Samuel, seizing the opportunity for redemption, had tackled the older man to the ground. The gun went off, the shot going wide and shattering a nearby window. In the ensuing struggle, the true nature of the syndicate's plan came to light. Robert, in his arrogance, began to monologue about the full scope of their ambitions, not just corporate domination, but a complete restructuring of global power dynamics. Little did he know that his words were being broadcast live to millions, thanks to the quick thinking of Megan Chen and her team. As Robert laid out the details of the syndicate's plan, the world listened in horror and outrage. Outside, the sound of police sirens grew louder. The authorities, armed with the evidence Megan had published, were closing in. The syndicate's reign of shadows was coming to an end. As Robert was led away in handcuffs, ranting about the new world order he had envisioned, Emily found herself surrounded by her family, not just Sarah and Alexander, but Vivian, Samuel, and Sophia too. They were battered, bruised, and forever changed by the ordeal they had endured, but they were together. In the days that followed, the full impact of the Blackwood revelations reverberated across the globe. Governments toppled, corporations crumbled, and a new era of transparency and accountability began to dawn. For the Blackwood family, the road to healing would be long and challenging. Trust had been broken, secrets had been revealed, and the weight of the past still hung heavy. But as they gathered in the living room of the manor that had once felt like a gilded cage, there was a sense of hope that had been missing for far too long. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," Alexander said, his voice heavy with emotion as he looked at Sarah and Emily. "But I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for the mistakes I've made." Sarah's smile was sad but not without warmth. "We've all made mistakes, Alexander. The important thing is that we're here now, together, ready to face whatever comes next." As the family began the slow process of rebuilding their relationships, Emily found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had come to Blackwood Manor as a nanny, ridiculed and dismissed by the family she would later learn was her own. Now, she stood as the linchpin that had held them together through the darkest of times. Vivian, in a moment of vulnerability that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago, approached Emily with tears in her eyes. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "I treated you abominably, and you still fought to save us all. I hope that in time, you might be able to see me as family." Emily, moved by the sincerity in Vivian's voice, took her hand. "We are family," she said simply. "All of us. Flawed, complicated, but family nonetheless." As night fell over Blackwood Manor, the family gathered on the terrace, looking out over the city lights. The world was changing, and their place in it was uncertain. But for the first time in years, there was a sense of unity and purpose among them. Samuel, his young face serious beyond his years, raised his glass in a toast. "To the truth," he said. "May it always come to light, no matter how long it takes." As they clinked their glasses together, Emily felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. She had come to Blackwood Manor seeking a fresh start, a chance to reinvent herself. Instead, she had uncovered the truth of her past and in doing so, had forged a future brighter than she could have imagined. The nanny's secret was out, and in its wake, a family had been reborn. As Emily looked around at the faces of her loved ones, Sarah's strength, Alexander's regret, Vivian's newfound humility, Samuel's determination, and Sophia's unwavering love, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The sun began to rise over Los Angeles, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. It was a new day, not just for the Blackwood family, but for the world. As Emily watched the play of light across the faces of her family, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be trials to face, wounds to heal, and a legacy to rebuild. But for the first time in her life, Emily Blackwood knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. As the first rays of sunlight touched her face, Emily smiled. The nanny who had once been ridiculed by the rich family had become the hero of her own story. And in the end, isn't that what we all hope for? A chance to rise above our circumstances, to find our true selves, and to create a family, whether by blood or by choice, that will stand by us through the darkest of times. The Blackwood saga had come to an end, but for Emily and her family, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter filled with hope, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of love that can weather any storm. As they stood there, bathed in the golden light of a new dawn, the future stretched out before them, uncertain, perhaps, but filled with endless possibilities. And isn't that, after all, the greatest gift any family can share?